been in the water when whatever happened. And they had clearly been boiled alive. The destruction at this entire site was so complete.
God, bro. Look at this site, bro. Look at this site, bro. Oh my God. Yo, what it do? SRT gang. It's your boy, the fat SwaggyReacts, and we are back with another reaction video. Shouts out to Mr. Ballen, man. Y'all already know this is Scary Hour. Your boy's back, and today we're gonna be checking out like he knew vampires were real and paid the price. So like, share, comment, subscribe. If you guys like content like this, man, I try to give you guys one of these every single day, man. So make sure you guys got the bell notifications on. And most of all, y'all hit the like button and hype the video up, because that helps the video get seen out there across the world. And just help your boy get to that 100K, man. Just help me get a step closer to that 100K, man. We at 88K so far. So, yeah, man, just help your boy get a step closer, man. I'm so excited to get back into these videos. I ain't finna hold y'all up, man. Like, shouts out to Mr. Ballen, one of the best storytellers on YouTube, man. I'm saying, let's get into it.
Today, I'm going to share 3 stories. One evening in November of 1972, a 68-year-old man named Demetrius Machura hurried around his small room at a boarding house in Stoke-on-Trent, England, pouring salt all over the floor. And as he did this, he looked out the window and saw the fading daylight and knew he had to hurry. However, running around like this was really taxing, especially on his lungs, because for decades he had worked in this very dusty pottery factory, and it had really taken a toll on him. So moving faster was really hard to do. But he really needed to push through the pain and the discomfort and finish what he was doing before it got dark out. Because when it got dark out, that's when the vampires came out. So Demetrius had immigrated from Poland about 25 years earlier. And in his home country, vampires were not just, lore, but actually they were a huge part of the culture and were often spoken about as being very real dangers that people should be scared of. And recently, Demetrius, despite now living in England, of course, he had begun hearing about a lot of vampire sightings here. A few years ago, he started noticing these news reports about a vampire that was living in London's Highgate Cemetery. And also around the same time he began seeing those reports, he also learned about these 2 girls who had been attacked by a vampire in the English countryside. And Demetrius, he just could not believe how people were just not that panicked about this. I mean, Demetrius was terrified. He had grown up being scared of vampires. That obviously, played a role in his reaction to these sightings now in England. But still, he's thinking like, why aren't more people scared about this? But even more than that, when Demetrius would actually talk about, these vampire concerns that he had with people in England, he found most people thought it was fake. That they thought that, these news reports and, all that stuff, it was just made up. It was fake. And then they would kind of look at Demetrius as sort of like an idiot for thinking that that was real. Like, come on, vampires aren't real. But to Demetrius, he just felt like, you know what? Those people who don't believe in this very real threat that obviously is getting worse here, those people, they're the idiots, not him. And so Demetrius, instead of, trying to defend his position or try to convince anyone to believe what he believed, he decided to just do what he had to do to protect himself. And he knew exactly what to do. So Demetrius, he had a whole routine of things he would do to protect himself from vampires when he was living in Poland, and mostly he had abandoned that routine when he came to England. But now, since these sightings, he had brought back that routine, and it was very extensive. He had added on to it, made it more elaborate, but it was something he now did every single night, because vampires only come out at night, and so that's when you need protection. So before Demetrius climbed in bed at night, he would pour salt all around the room. and he would also scatter fresh garlic cloves everywhere, since those were both very toxic to vampires. And then after that, he would go up to each of the crosses that he had on his wall to make sure they were properly secured, because crosses are known deterrents to vampires. And then typically, after checking all the crucifixes, he would go around and maybe do a little more salt, a few more garlic cloves, and then once everything was in place and secure, he would climb into bed. And the moment his head hit the pillow, he would feel his heart rate finally start to settle down, because he knew that, at least for this night, he would be safe. And so in November of 1972, Demetrius just continued every night doing his vampire protection procedure. And even though some people thought this was very strange and very paranoid of him because, vampires aren't real, right? Well, it wasn't hurting anyone. Demetrius felt better when he did it. It was just sort of his own thing, and so he just continued to do it, and it didn't cause any problems. Until November 24th of that year.
Los Angeles, 1981.
What the hell going on? December 25th of this year. And listen, y'all, I know y'all probably gonna be on my ass for not having like YouTube Premium right now, man, but I apologize. I still love y'all though. Like, y'all can always help a brother out. Help a brother out. You feel me?
10 p.m., Police Constable John Pye of the Stoke-on-Trent Police Department, he walked up to the entrance of Demetrius's boarding house. He was here to do a wellness check because the landlady of this place had called the station to tell them that she hadn't seen one of her tenants, Demetrius Matura, in about a week and was starting to worry about him. So now Pye knocked on the front door, and a few seconds later, this older woman swung it open and she introduced herself as the landlady, and then she let Pye inside and led him down a hallway and stopped in front of Demetrius's door. And so Pye knocked and he called out to Demetrius, announcing that he was the police and he was just here to make sure he was okay. But there was no sound coming from inside the room. And then when Pye reached down and tried the handle, he found it was locked. And so after knocking a few more times and calling out and still not hearing anything from inside, Pye told the landlady to go ahead and step back because he was gonna knock this door down. So Pye, he leaned back and then rammed his shoulder against the door, and actually it swung open really quickly, and immediately Pye and the landlady were hit with this really strong smell of garlic that was coming out of the very dark room in front of them. And so Pye immediately yells into the room for Demetrius, but there's no response. And so Pye, he reaches in and tries to find a light switch, and he does, and he flips it on, but it wasn't working for some reason. So Pye, he pulled out his flashlight off his belt, he clicked it on, and then he walked into the room. And right away, Pye felt like this small, dark room was the most bizarre, creepy space he had ever been inside of. There was what appeared to be salt all over the floor. And there were also cloves of garlic, like everywhere, not just on the ground, but also up on windowsills. And then at some point, Pye swept his flashlight from the wall over to the bed in the back of this room. It's basically like a one-bedroom apartment. And he sees the bed, and he sees there was a definitive human-sized lump under the sheets. And so right away, he had a good sense of what it was. And so Pye, he walked across the floor, stepping on garlic and salt as he went. And when he reached the bed, he pulled back the sheets, and under the sheets was the very obviously dead body of Demetrius Matura.
Oh my God, the dead body. Oh my. He did everything he needed to do to try to stop, with the garlic and the salt and all that, bro, and it still didn't work, bro. Damn.
Under the sheets was the very obviously dead body of Demetrius Matura. Pye heard the sound of the landlady who had followed him inside by this point. She gasped because she's seeing, what's inside of her boarding house here.
Right.
And at this point, even though Pye was very sure Demetrius was dead, just to be sure, he reached down and he felt for a pulse, but there was none. And also Demetrius's skin was very cold and very pale. However, despite how very obviously deceased Demetrius was, Pye looked around and couldn't really make sense of exactly how he had died. I mean, there was no denying that he was in a very strange location, but he couldn't really picture how the salt and the garlic and the crosses could have had anything to do with his death. Maybe it was just the the insanity of a dying man who crawled into bed and he died in here or something, but it was like, there's no visible wounds, there's no blood anywhere, there's nothing. It's just this weird, creepy room this guy's in, and he's just dead under the sheets. It was just bizarre. But there was one thing about Demetrius that in Pi's mind was pretty disturbing. I mean, even more so than what he was already seeing. And that was that Demetrius, he had died with this terrified looking expression on his face. Like his mouth was wide open, like it was frozen as if he'd been screaming as he took his final breath, which made Demetrius wonder if maybe when he died, his death had been quite painful or just terrifying. Like maybe Demetrius had seen something, like as he died, was he scared of something as he was dying that caused his face to sort of freeze in this expression. However, that made Pi think that maybe this was a homicide. You know, that the victim, Demetrius, was scared of the attacker, and that's why he looked the way he did. The attacker is attacking him, and he's reacting. But Pi's looking at the body thinking, I don't think this was a homicide, because there's just no injury anywhere. So what would the attacker have done? Like, how could they have forcibly killed Demetrius without leaving any marks anywhere? Now, Pi knew he was not going to get any real answers here without an autopsy, but while he was here, he could at least do a search of the room and also canvass the neighbors, starting with the landlady. So he turned to the visibly shocked landlady and asked her, like, hey, what's the deal with all the salt and the crosses and the garlic? Like, what's that about? And surprisingly, she shrugged it off like, it was just no big deal. It's just what Demetrius did. And when Pi was like, what do you mean? She explained that Demetrius had a really serious phobia of vampires. And these were measures he took to protect himself from vampires. For a second, Pi just stared back at her like he couldn't believe what he was being told. But then he was also thinking like, all right, I'm looking around the room. This is already totally weird. So actually, in a way, that sort of tracks. However, Pi wasn't sure if Demetrius's apparent delusion around vampires really had anything to do with Demetrius's death or not, or if this is just a quirk of the case that this man died, you know, however he died, and also was scared of vampires. He didn't know. But for now, Pi was just incredibly curious and absolutely determined to get answers.
Oh man, that's getting, yeah, like it's getting juicy. It's getting juicy. Hurry up with these damn ads, man. God damn, man. I'm sorry, y'all. I know y'all hate me, bro. I know.
A month later, Police Constable Pi was sitting at his desk in police headquarters reading a library book about vampires. So Demetrius's case was actually on pause while Pi waited for the autopsy results. But even though he really couldn't do much until those results came in, Pi himself just couldn't stop thinking about Demetrius's creepy room and all his vampire stuff. So on his own, Pi had become a little bit obsessed. Now, there was a possibility that Demetrius had simply died from some illness in his sleep. Pi had learned that Demetrius had actually been sick a lot before he died, and that he'd worked in a pottery factory that really affected his lungs. So Pi knew that it was entirely possible that Demetrius had some form of potter's rot, which was a lung disease that a lot of pottery workers got from the bad air in the factory. But potter's rot was like this slow-moving, sort of compounding sickness. It was very progressive, but over a long period of time. And Demetrius apparently had died suddenly. And Pi had spoken to all of Demetrius's neighbors, and they all said, you know, in the time leading up to his death, he wasn't showing any obvious sign of getting sick or getting sicker, I should say. Like there was no progression happening. He seemed normal and then was just dead. So that sort of confirmed that potter's rot seemed unlikely. Additionally, when Pi spoke to the neighbors, they also communicated that it didn't seem like Demetrius had any obvious enemies. So the idea that there had been some kind of invisible foul play like poisoning also didn't really make sense. And so without any other theories to work on, and without the autopsy results yet, Pi had been doing a lot of research on vampires. Now, he was certainly not about to consider that a vampire had killed Demetrius, but the scene of Demetrius's death was just so weird that Pi couldn't get past the feeling that somehow vampires must have had something to do with his death. So far though, his research really hadn't helped clear that up. But just then, Pi's phone rang. And when he answered it, his heart began to race because it was the coroner. And the coroner said the autopsy was done. And the coroner told Pi that he was never going to believe what that autopsy had discovered. It would turn out Pi had been right. Vampires had everything to do with this death. On the night that Demetrius died, he had done all the things he usually did to keep himself safe before he climbed in bed. But unlike the other nights when he had done this procedure, this night, his routine had not worked. So Demetrius, along with spreading salt all over his room, also put garlic cloves everywhere, since that was one of the most famous ways to ward off vampires. And so he did it every single night. And one of the places, in addition to the floor and the windowsills, that Demetrius would put these cloves at night, one of those places was his own mouth. And he'd become really good at keeping that garlic clove under his tongue while he...
Well, please don't tell me he possibly choked on the garlic when it was in his... Man, please don't tell me that.
...was asleep.
Please don't tell me that,
But
man.
on that night in November, something went wrong. While he slept, the clove slipped out from under his tongue, went down his throat, and got stuck. And during the autopsy, the coroner literally found the clove still stuck there.
Damn,
so it was determined
man.
that he had died from choking on it.
Shit.
So while garlic cloves may have played a role in protecting Demetrius from vampires, unfortunately, it was literally the clove itself that killed him.
Damn, man. Damn. Rest in peace, bro. That's terrible. But you gotta do what you gotta do to protect yourself. But I wouldn't have took it that far to the point I put it in my mouth. No. It's not that deep. Just put it around the bed and we just gonna do it like that. Like in the walls, the windows, the doors. Yes. But that's a little bit too much right there. Front tooth.
One fall afternoon in the late 9th century, a Viking leader named Sigurd Eystein rode his horse across this large field in northeastern Scotland. Riding on either side of him were 2 of his commanders, and behind the 3 of them was Sigurd's entire army. This field they were traveling across was about to become a battlefield, and Sigurd and his commanders were riding out to meet the leader of the opposing army who would be taking part in this battle, a horrible buck-toothed man named Mile Brigta. And Mile was actually already in place at the meeting spot, right in the middle of this battlefield. And he was on his horse, and he was flanked on either side by 2 commanders as well. And then, well behind him was his sea of warriors that would be taking part in this battle. So Mile, he ruled a kingdom called Murray, which was a large area in the north of Scotland. And Sigurd wanted to conquer it. And so today, Sigurd and Mile were meeting in the middle of this really potential battlefield with their respective armies waiting in the wings, behind them. And the idea is they would try to negotiate. Effectively, Sigurd would, basically tell Mile, give me some percentage of your land and we won't, raid your area and try to conquer you. And it was sort of on Mile to determine if that was a worthy thing or not, or if it was better to just stand your ground and fight. Sigurd was not worried because he knew that ultimately he was going to win that fight. Not only did Sigurd's Viking army vastly outnumber the Murray, but Sigurd himself was just far more accomplished on the battlefield than Mile.
This isn't any move.
Okay, so,
It's your
obviously, experience is going to play a part in this, huh?
Sigurd was actually known as Sigurd the Mighty, and he was this famous, fearsome warrior who'd spent the last 2 decades ruthlessly conquering parts of Scotland for his king back in Norway. Mile, on the other hand, was not really feared or respected like that, certainly not by Sigurd. Mile was really known just to be sort of impulsive and kind of untrustworthy, and also definitely kind of dumb. And now, as Sigurd and his commanders arrived in the middle of the field, right in front of Mile and his 2 commanders, and they brought their horses to a halt, Sigurd could now see with his own 2 eyes another thing about Mile that he actually was known for, he was famous for, and that was his 2 giant front teeth that stuck out way over his bottom lip, and actually had earned him a nickname of sorts, which was Mile the Buck-Toothed. And so not long after Sigurd arrived, Sigurd and Mile and the other commanders began their negotiation. But Sigurd quickly realized that Mile was not there to make concessions in order to, find a path to peace. He was actually trying to make demands of the Vikings. Like, he was there telling the Vikings what to do, which is just, in Sigurd's mind, totally ridiculous. I mean, you're outnumbered, you're outclassed, like, what are you doing? In fact, Sigurd, couldn't believe what was even happening. I mean, as far as he was concerned, Mile was just a nobody, and his demands in some ways were just disrespectful, not real demands. If Mile was smart, he would be begging for mercy here, but obviously he was not smart. And so Sigurd quickly realized that what would have to happen here is he and his Vikings would have to just slaughter his army and seize his lands. And so at some point, while Mile was literally mid-sentence, making whatever demand he was making, Sigurd turned to his two commanders and just gave the signal that they were not doing this. They were going to have to fight here. And so Sigurd just grabbed the horse's reins, turned around, and he and his commanders galloped back to his army. And as soon as they got there, Sigurd told his men that they were going to have to massacre all the Murray. But they needed to save Mile the Bucktoothed for him. Hours later, Sigurd was still on his horse, but this time he was leading what remained of his victorious Viking army down this dirt road away from the battlefield and back towards their camp. Sigurd, like basically all of his men, was totally exhausted.
Right.
But he was also full of adrenaline because the battle was over and it had gone exactly the way he knew it would.
Good.
His soldiers had completely destroyed Mile and his army, and he, Sigurd, had personally killed Mile. And so
Damn.
now, as Sigurd rode along here, he looked down at Mile's severed head, which he himself had removed from his adversary's body.
Shit.
And then he had attached the head to his saddle. He looked down at the head.
God damn, man. Hey, bro, I know one thing. I mean, back then, bro, them niggas, like they will kill you, chop your head, chop every limb off, then take it back to the camp like it's a fucking like trophy and shit, bro. Have it on a stick for everybody in the damn, like everybody can see it, my nigga. Like ruthless.
Adversary's
for
body.
real.
And then he had attached the head to his saddle. He looked down at the head, and the head's dangling near his legs, and Mile's eyes are wide open and looking vacantly up at Sigurd, and his mouth was wide open as well, which only sort of made his front teeth look even bigger and hang out even more. And as Sigurd gazed down at this head, he couldn't help but smile as a wave of just pure satisfaction washed over him.
Yeah, no, these motherfuckers is crazy. They psychopaths. Nigga, you smiling at a nigga whole head in your damn saddle and you sitting here fucking smiling like you was just like it's
During their pre-battle negotiations, Mile had just been unbearably annoying and sort of offensive. And so Sigurd was thrilled he'd gotten the best of him and now had his head dangling right near his legs.
Right.
Like, that is just perfect for Sigurd.
That's
And now that Mile the Bucktoothed was dead, Sigurd was one step closer to conquering all of Scotland. So he gave out this loud, triumphant war cry, and his men answered him with cheers. Then Sigurd spurred his horse into a full gallop.
Damn.
However, just a few days later, everything had changed for Sigurd. By this point, Sigurd was now laying under a wool blanket in this stone shack in one of his Scottish settlements, and he was screaming in pain. Because over the last couple of days, he'd gotten incredibly sick, and now he was delirious, and he had such a bad fever that he was both covered in sweat and also shivering nonstop. And then at some point, the doctor who had been taking care of Sigurd came into the shack to check on him, and after looking him over, the doctor just shook his head and told Sigurd that he had done all he could, but this sickness, whatever it was going to kill him. And Sigurd, when he heard this, he felt nothing but rage. Not because he was dying, but because he knew that he'd actually been very wrong. He had not gotten the best of Mile the Bucktoothed. Mile the Bucktoothed had clearly gotten the best of him. So it would turn out, after the big battle, after, Sigurd had won so triumphantly, as he was riding along, carrying along with him the head of his adversary, Mile's severed head, well, as he began galloping faster and faster, and he's cheering for his men, they're so triumphant, and everyone's cheering along, as he's going faster and faster, the head, the severed head, began bouncing, because of the movement. And remember, Mile's got those big two front teeth. He's got a nickname, Mile the Bucktoothed, for a reason. Well, those teeth, as the head jostled around, began puncturing Sigurd's thigh. And he didn't notice it because he was so jacked up on adrenaline. He's galloping off, he's looking down, he sees blood all over his legs, and he's thinking it's gotta be Miles' blood from the fact that his head's been cut off. But no, it was actually Sigurd's blood from the punctures from Miles' buck teeth. And so in the end, even though Sigurd did, successfully kill Mile, he won the battle, well, it would turn out that Mile wasn't done with Sigurd, because Mile ultimately caused Sigurd's death because those punctures got horribly infected. There was no antibiotics to cure the infection.
Damn, that's fucked up. So, obviously he didn't get all the treatment that he was supposed to get for, somebody bites you and shit like that. Shit got infected and possibly,
and ultimately, Sigurd died.
Damn, that's crazy. That's wild, bro. Damn. So, so both of the leaders died, basically. So, he's about to be a new sheriff in town, basically. God damn.
There are 3 victims we know.
Crazy, dog. That's crazy. This is exactly why we love Mr. Ballen, man. He always leave us with cliffhangers, bro. Like those should be bombshells, bro. Like every single time.
Around 2 p.m. on July 11th, 1978, a man named Francisco Imbernon Valenia drove down a highway a few miles outside of the coastal town of La Rapita, Spain. Earlier, Francisco had left the warehouse where he worked, and he was now driving back toward the city where he lived. And so far, this drive had been very uncomfortable and sweaty since it was really hot out today, and he didn't have air conditioning. And also, he was just very annoyed. Because before he had left the warehouse, he'd gotten into a disagreement with another employee. So Francisco was in his 50s, and he had been doing his job for years. And while for sure he was a bit of a curmudgeon about certain things, he was also really experienced and self-sufficient. But for some reason, this other younger guy, this coworker of his who worked in a completely different department, had felt the need to micromanage him and start telling Francisco how to do his job. And he'd even had the audacity to tell Francisco that if he didn't listen to him, listen to this criticism and change your behavior, if you don't do that, you're gonna regret it.
Hey, boy, and I be hating people like that, bro. Like, how you gonna tell me how to do my job, my nigga? Do your job, my nigga. I know how to do my job. I've been here for a very long time, my nigga. Like, come on, bro, move.
Needless to say, Francisco did not appreciate being told how to do his job.
Right.
Especially by some young idiot here.
Exactly.
And so in the moment, during their confrontation, Francisco had simply ignored the other employee and kept doing his work. But in reality, the whole thing had really bothered him. And even now, as he drove down the highway, it was all he was thinking about. He was just totally stewing over what this guy told him. Up ahead, Francisco noticed a sign that said a few toll booths were coming up. And now Francisco felt a whole new wave of irritation about these stupid tolls. He thought they were a complete ripoff. And so he made a point to never pay them if he could help it. And luckily for Francisco, on this particular route, he did know a way around these tolls. It was a back route that did take a bit longer, but it saved him money.
Right.
Plus, it ran right by the ocean.
Hey, listen, I don't blame you goddamn, because them tolls be, man. I be hate going to the DMV at the end of the year. Like, we going to goddamn, like, pay for our new tags. We got a whole toll, bro. They literally just took, like, $130 from me, bro. Like, I was like, what the hell? I don't remember going through those tolls, but probably did on my ass. I'd be everywhere.
And so it was very scenic. And so at the next exit, he pulled off the highway and began taking this long cut. About half an hour later, around 2:30 p.m., Francisco drove down a narrow road that ran right along the ocean. And as he did this, Francisco, if this was even possible by this point, felt even more annoyed. He had been hoping by the time he got down here that there would be some kind of sea breeze to cool him down because there was no AC in the truck. But it was somehow, despite being near the ocean here, it was somehow even hotter than when he had been out on the highway. Just up ahead, there was this very popular campground called Los Alfaques. It was this expansive field right next to the beach that was full of camper vans and tents, and there were also a few businesses like restaurants, and a general store that served the grounds. And Francisco saw that this afternoon, the area was absolutely packed. There were hundreds of people just hanging around their campsites and swimming in the ocean. And as Francisco drove past, all he began to think is how great it would be if he could just pull over for a second and take a plunge in the water himself and actually cool off. And so he was letting his mind wander, sort of wishing this ride was less miserable than it had been so far, when an odd sound caught his attention. It was like this metallic groaning sound. And at first, he couldn't even place it. Like he had no idea what it was, and pretty quickly the sound went away. So he just continued driving along, and then he heard it again. Except this time it was much louder. And this time, Francisco did know what it was, but it was already too late. Just seconds later, people in towns miles away from the campground where Francisco was passing by heard this deafening boom. And from all directions, everyone turned towards Los Alfaques just in time to see this enormous fireball rise into the air like a huge mushroom cloud. It looked like a bomb had literally gone off. But before anybody could make sense of this, there was another explosion, and then another and another. It was like this rapid-fire chain of blasts that boomed over the campground one after another for several minutes. And then finally, when it all went quiet, it was just like flames and smoke and ash just soaring into the sky over this campground and the beach. Within minutes, emergency response units from towns all outside of Los Alfaques descended on the campground to try to figure out what happened and to see if anyone was still alive. But when they actually got there and saw the devastation, like they couldn't believe it. The scale was almost incomprehensible. There were all these blackened, charred bodies scattered everywhere. They were all contorted from the heat, and some were even still sitting in the remains of camp chairs, like they had been instantly cooked in place when the explosions first began. Now, that was horrifying enough, what they saw up on the field. But what first responders saw down on the beach was even worse, because along the shoreline were bodies of people who had been in the water when whatever happened. And they had clearly been boiled alive. The destruction at this entire site was so complete.
God, bro. Look at this site, bro. Look at this site, bro. Oh my God.
So total that first responders really couldn't even begin to guess what had happened, beyond obviously some kind of explosion. That task of deciphering what happened would take investigators several days, and what they would discover was that it all came back to that fight that Francisco Imbernón-Villena had had with the younger employee before he left the warehouse.
Damn.
So on the day of this catastrophe, it was true that Francisco was on his way back home from the warehouse. He had left work and he was going home. But he wasn't driving a regular truck. It was not a personal truck. And also, he had one stop to make before he could actually go home for good. Francisco was a long-haul truck driver, and he was driving this specialized truck to transport some specialized cargo to its final destination. That cargo was pressurized liquid gas, which is highly flammable and very volatile. So earlier that morning, the younger employee, who Francisco was so upset that he had been micromanaging him, he had worked here for so many years, how dare he?
I agree.
Well, the younger employee had been warning Francisco that Francisco had overfilled his tanker. He had put too much pressurized liquid gas in his truck.
So like that's what the little guy was, the newer guy was telling him, but he didn't listen, huh? But why why Francisco didn't know that though? Like how he didn't know that if he'd been working for this company for years, unless this is his first time dealing with something like this, like the gas tank or something like that. Like nah, bro, there's no way.
Which was an incredibly dangerous thing to do if he really had overfilled it.
Right.
Because pressurized liquid gas needs room to expand.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't have enough room, it can explode.
Yeah.
And that's true on a normal day, but it's even more true, even more dangerous when you're driving this cargo around on a hot day. Because heat, like external heat on the truck, will make that gas expand
And
even more. But
Damn.
Francisco, he just brushed this young employee's warning off. He had years of experience and knew that drivers like him overfilled their trucks all the time. That way they can get more fuel to their destination.
Oh man, see, man. Oh man.
And so he just assumed that, this other employee was overreacting because this never mattered. This never had any impact on anything. They just made more money. And so he just went on with his day. And everything was fine. Nothing happened to the truck until Francisco happened to be driving past that campground. At that point, the heat did cause the gas to expand past the point of no return, and it blew up.
Yeah.
And it sent a scorching fireball that was thousands of degrees Fahrenheit through the campground that was full of people.
And could you imagine the people that was, again, like on the beach and like around it, but just sitting there relaxing, thinking, having a normal day, bro, walking down the street, sitting on the beach, trying to get a tan, and goddamn, shit explode, and you, damn.
The initial blast was over a mile wide. And that blast triggered a wave of smaller explosions from all the camper vans and the portable grills, basically all the gas cans in that mile radius, those all detonated as well. And so in the end, Francisco, along with 158 other people, largely at that campground, died from the initial explosion. And then some estimates, when you consider long-term disease, long-term health issues from this blast, they put the final death toll at as many as 243 people.
My God. God damn, 240. Oh my God, bro. What the fuck? All you had to do was listen. Granted, I felt like Francisco should have known this though, man. I really felt like he should have known this, being with that company for so many years, man. Like that's why I always say, bro, like, do your research, especially like if you knowing by doing like dangerous work like that, and you know it's gonna be hot that day. You gotta really sit there and think about the shit they got going on, man, and for like Francisco not doing that, bro, 240 something people lost their lives, man, and that's super unfortunate, man. Like, shout out to Mr. Ballen, man. Tell me how y'all feel about this video, man. By liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and just hop in the comment section, bro. I'm interested in seeing what y'all got to say, because that was horrific. That was a horrific way to go out, man. Like, rest in peace to all those innocent people who lost their lives, man, for just trying to enjoy their regular day and end up getting just basically burnt alive, bro, melted and shit, bro. That shit is diabolical, bro. Like, share, comment, subscribe, man. I make sure you guys are tuned in tomorrow when I drop another one for y'all, man. And SRT gang, I am out this, man. Let's get it.